Before there were vows, there was fire. Before rings bound fingers, it was fear that bound souls. Long before the word love found a voice, humans reached for one another, not for romance, but for survival. In a world ruled by hunger, freezing nights, and predators with teeth like daggers, pairing up meant one more day alive. And yet, something deeper stirred beneath the layers of need. A quiet yearning, a spark of attachment. Even with the roar of saber-toothed cats in the dark, men watched their partners, women studied their hunters, not just for survival, but for signs of closeness, of loyalty. And when that loyalty wavered, jealousy rose, not modern, not soft, but primal, burning, ancient, and unforgettable. In the Stone Age, there were no wedding songs echoing through the trees, no veils, no sacred vows, but there was survival, and survival was heavy. To carry it alone meant exhaustion, even death. So humans, raw, wild, unpolished, found each other. Not for romance, but for relief. She foraged through thorn and frost, gathering roots and berries. He tracked prey through snow and silence, returning with bloodied hands and fire. When she ached, he guarded. When he bled, she soothed. These were not gestures of ceremony. They were instinctual acts of partnership. Fossilized bones tell stories of joint burial sites, of shared shelters, of broken limbs that had time to heal. Proof that someone stayed, someone helped. Modern hunter-gatherers still show the same patterns: shared burdens, mutual defense, emotional connection beneath the surface. Before love had a name, it had a purpose: to share the unbearable and make it bearable. Together. In the tight circles of ancient tribes, reputation was everything. There were no ceremonies, no written contracts, no rings to signal commitment, only the quiet weight of respect. Those who carried skill, courage, and emotional steadiness drew others in. A man who could track silently for miles, bring down prey, and share without boasting. He didn't need to speak. His presence spoke for him. A woman who soothed conflict, tended wounds, and cared for children not her own. She was watched, remembered, trusted. Attraction was not loud. It was earned. In these close-knit groups, pair bonds formed from a web of observation. Everyone saw. Everyone remembered. There were no secrets. And though no law enforced fidelity, the tribe had its own currency: reciprocity. Give, and you would receive. Betray, and you might sleep alone, starve, or worse, be ignored. Within this ancient economy of action and worth, expectations formed, subtle, unspoken, yet binding. In that silence, commitment was born. Privacy, as we know it, didn't exist in the ancient world. There were no walls, no rooms, no locks. At night, the tribe huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, skin to skin, beneath hides, beside the fire. The flicker of flame danced across faces, bodies, breaths. Intimacy unfolded not in secrecy, but in plain sight, quietly, instinctively, without shame. There were no romantic lines, no rehearsed gestures, a glance, a touch, a shared warmth in the dark. It wasn't always love, but it was real. And it carried weight. Connections formed under the open sky in front of watchful eyes. The tribe didn't just witness, they remembered. With every embrace came risk, of jealousy, of shifting dynamics, of new life. There were no rules, only rhythms, social, biological, emotional. Intimacy was not hidden, but it wasn't casual either. In a world where everything was shared, food, space, danger, bodies too, became part of that deep, unspoken trust. And once given, It changed everything. When a child was conceived, something subtle but profound shifted. The woman, once just a gatherer, a companion, became the lifeblood of continuity. Her body carried the tribe's future. Her needs became collective needs. And if the man remained, if he stayed beside her through swelling belly and sleepless nights, he became more than a mate. He became protector, provider, and presence. There were no paternity tests, no surnames passed down, only memory and observation. The tribe saw who stood by and who vanished. And in that witnessing, commitment took form. Not written, not spoken, but deeply enforced by expectation. Parenting wasn't just personal, it was public. Others watched who shared meat with the nursing mother, who held the infant by the fire, who taught the child to throw, to forage, to belong. Those who invested were valued. Those who didn't slowly faded from the social weave. In a world without contracts, the child was the glue, and staying, through storm, famine, and fear, was the truest form of loyalty. Monogamy, as we understand it today, exclusive, lifelong, and idealized, didn't exist in rigid terms during the Stone Age. But commitment did. Some pairings lasted for years, even a lifetime, forged in the heat of survival and mutual reliance. Others shifted with seasons, scarcity, or social needs, not from betrayal, but from adaptation. In some tribes, bonds formed without exclusivity. Emotional and sexual connections could stretch across individuals. In others, temporary partnerships emerged to fulfill roles, protection, reproduction, or even political harmony within the group. There was no moral judgment, only functional balance. Loyalties could evolve without rupture. Staying wasn't a rule, it was a choice, remade each day around the fire. And while some wandered, many returned. Because even in fluidity, the longing for connection, for someone familiar in the chaos of wildness, endured. Commitment wasn't defined by ownership. It was defined by presence, by repetition, and by the quiet decision to stay. There were no vows, no promises to break. Yet still, jealousy flickered. Even in the most primitive camps, where love had no language and freedom was the norm, humans felt it. A glance held too long. A shared meal between the wrong two people. A man watching his partner laugh with another by the fire. Meat exchanged like a private ritual. A woman seeing the father of her child return, smelling of another's skin. These were not acts of betrayal as we define them today, but they stirred something ancient. A knot in the stomach, a tightening of the jaw, a quickened heartbeat. Jealousy didn't need rules to exist. It was older than rules. It wasn't born from romance, but from survival. The fear of being replaced, of losing protection, provision, or affection. These weren't civilized emotions. They were animal, etched into bone, passed down through blood. Even in the wild, even in the open, something in us watched, waited, and burned. Jealousy wasn't poetry, it was biology. It didn't blossom from romance, but from the raw calculus of survival. For men, the fear ran deep. What if she bore a child that wasn't his? What if his time, his food, his protection were spent raising another man's bloodline? For women, the danger was different, but no less visceral. If he wandered, who would feed her during pregnancy? Who would guard her child in the night? Jealousy wasn't a flaw. It was a defense system. It helped humans track fidelity, investment, and risk. Because in a small tribe of 20, One betrayal echoed louder than any scream. Everyone saw. Everyone remembered. A subtle shift in attention. A change in who shared meat with whom. Possessiveness wasn't about dominance. It was about securing the fragile alliances that kept people alive. Not out of greed, but necessity. Because to be replaced wasn't just heartbreak. It could mean starvation, isolation, death. There were no laws carved in stone, no judges in animal skins. But justice still breathed, slow, silent, and brutal in its own way. In small tribes, reputation was currency, and relationships were part of the tribe's delicate web. Men who repeatedly disrupted bonds, charming and abandoning, stirring conflict, were not punished by decree. They were excluded from hunts, left behind when the group moved, silently removed from decision-making. Women who broke bonds recklessly, who ignored social rhythm, faced cold shoulders, fewer helping hands, and whispers around the fire. The tribe didn't need a courtroom. It had memory. And memory, when shared by 20 people, was enforcement enough. Most separations were quiet. A man slept farther from the fire. A woman gathered roots alone. But sometimes, the tension cracked. 2 rivals. 1 woman. 1 man. No words. Just clenched jaws, stone fists, and bone meeting bone beneath the moonlight. And when the blood dried, the tribe rebalanced. Not by law, but by necessity. Long before words formed sentences, the body spoke in silence. A glance withheld. A back turned during sleep. A piece of meat not offered. In a world without language, these were declarations. Of anger. Of distance. Of disappointment. The tribe watched and understood. Every gesture carried meaning. Emotion lived in movement. In who sat beside whom, who touched, who turned away. But just as there were signs of rupture, there were signals of mending. A man returning with more meat than needed, placing it gently beside her. A woman brushing dirt from his shoulder, letting her hand linger. A mother holding the child tighter, casting a look that said, "He matters." These were not grand reconciliations. They were small, intentional acts. And in those acts, an ancient language pulsed. Even without speech, humans had tools for forgiveness. Not with apologies, but with presence. Even then, they knew how to say, without saying it, "I want you back." Loyalty in the ancient world wasn't rooted in virtue. It was rooted in value. You stayed with someone because it made sense, because it worked. She brought food. He brought fire. Together, they survived. Loyalty was transactional, but not cold. It was fierce, lived day by day, through presence and provision. If one stopped giving, the other eventually stopped staying. And yet, something deeper still emerged. Exclusivity wasn't demanded, but it often happened. Desire, attention, even subtle possessiveness, the seeds of pair bonding, grew from the soil of shared experience. We see it not only in ourselves, but in our closest cousins. Chimpanzees compete for mates. Bonobos cling to partners with jealous glances. Territorial behavior over lovers didn't begin with poetry. It began with primates. Not every connection was lifelong. But the instinct to claim, to protect, to return to one person, that was already there. Not because of romance, but because loyalty, even when fluid, served survival. And survival remembers what worked. Pair bonding wasn't exclusive to Homo sapiens. It transcended species lines, crossing into the blood of those we once called other. When our ancestors met Neanderthals and Denisovans, it wasn't just a clash of tools or territory. It was an exchange of flesh, of instincts, of longing. They didn't simply compete, they connected. They mated, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. And in doing so, they rewrote what it meant to be human. Today, fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA still pulse through our veins, a genetic echo of prehistoric desire. From these ancient unions, some fleeting, some lasting, came new hybrids, new strengths, new stories. We were not born from purity. We were born from entanglement, of species, of emotion, of survival. Not from marriage contracts, but from campfires and instincts, from jealousy, cooperation, and hunger, both physical and emotional. Our legacy is not clean. It is wild, tangled, and deeply human. And it began the moment we reached across difference and didn't let go. Even in our modern debates, over commitment, over infidelity, over the meaning of love, we're not lost. We're echoing something ancient. These struggles didn't begin with dating apps or divorce papers. They began beside fires, beneath stars, when survival meant knowing who would stay. Jealousy isn't a flaw. It's memory. A deep, biological recall of a time when being left behind wasn't sad. It was lethal. We ache for loyalty because our ancestors needed it to live. We crave connection because it was once the only safety we knew. Every doubt, every pang of fear when love shifts or fades, is part of that legacy. We are not broken. We are descendants of those who watched closely, who guarded fiercely, who chose again and again to stay. Emotion isn't weakness. It's the thread that carried us through winters, through hunger, through loss. And when we fight for love, for trust, for belonging, we are simply honoring what kept us alive, not just as individuals, but as a species. If something in this story stirred you, something ancient, wordless, familiar, then you already carry the thread we follow. At Prehistoric Shadows, we don't just unearth bones, we unearth the emotions that shaped them. We explore the firelight flickers of love, fear, loyalty, and longing that burned long before language. Here, there are no modern myths, no forced narratives, only the raw, uncovered truth of what it meant to be human when being human was still dangerous. Subscribe to join those who remember that before history, there was intimacy, and behind every scar on a stone wall was a story written in the human heart.